of our talk that Jerry and I agreed to today was peeking into the future of technology and education. And when Jerry and I were talking about how to divvy this up, we thought that I would address it a bit more from the policy broad perspective, a leadership kind of perspective, a structural systems level perspective. And Jerry would speak more to the actual, what's happening in classrooms, what's the day-to-day of this mean. And so my talk for the next 10 minutes or so, 15 maybe, will be on structural components. And specifically, I want to quickly just provide a short technology observation. I don't want to take a lot of time there. I'm assuming if you're here today, you're aware that technology is having some change on our society. And then I want to bring up three concerns that I have in particular about what this means for us and what do we do here in relation to that. So first, my observation. So the observation that I want to leave you with is we don't know what the future holds. It's impossible to know that, right? But we do know that it will be exponentially different. And how do we know that? Well, this is a law that's coming into place called Kurzweil's law. Ray Kurzweil, I don't know if any of you have heard of him or not, but this is Ray. So what he says is an analysis of the history of technology shows that technological change is exponential, contrary to the common sense intuitive linear view. So we won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It'll be more like 20,000 years of progress at today's rate. And we actually have some proof of this. So here is something you've probably heard of called Moore's Law. And so Moore's Law says that the computing capacity of a basic transistor that's in any of our computers is doubling every 2 years, meaning it's exponential. And this is a logarithmic graph, and so the straight line there is an exponential curve. And so we've seen this with the computing capacity, that it has been exponential. And if you want, I can give you Ray's information, and he can show you lots of other examples of how technological change is exponential, not intuitive linear. And so I think that that's an important point. And to illustrate what that means for us in society, I just want to throw you a little bit of some stats. So it's estimated that we'll produce something around 70 exabytes of information this year. So, to put that into terms that we sort of understand, that's 70 billion gigabytes across humanity. And this is actually an old number. We're probably well into the hundreds by now. So that's all going to happen this year, at least. And so 70 exabytes is a lot of information. It's larger than the Library of Congress. In fact, it's a whole lot larger than the Library of Congress. It's 518,000 times the Library of Congress. Will be produced this year using all of our technology. So all of that information that we're producing, 0.01% of it is going to be replicated on paper. So what I want to convey is this is an exponential change that's happening. This is not a little change that's happening. This is exponential. All right? So an historical analog is the Industrial Revolution, but compressed into 15 or so years, not a century. So obviously this is going to be quite the little ride that we're going to be on for a little while here. We've already been on. All of us have already changed our habits. Who uses the typewriter or writes out longhand anymore? Richard, fantastic. I'm glad to see it. As our historian, you can remember these times. But most of us, that's good. Yes. So, but I think it's important. Richard's point is indicative of what's happening. Richard is saying that in his lifetime, in our lifetimes, in this room, we started at a point when we wrote out longhand our papers, and in our own lifetime, we have now almost totally transitioned to the point where we write everything digitally. And as we produce more and more content, we'll shift more and more from writing things to producing video, music, all of these multimedia kinds of formats, which is why the number is so large, 0.01%. That sounds so striking, right? But here's a great way to visualize it. We have satellites. NASA has satellites Is Robin here? Yeah, don't you work with NASA a little bit? All right, so NASA has satellites just floating up there that are just constantly streaming data back, okay? And those terabytes of data every day, terabytes. Okay, there's no way we could ever have done that with paper because it's physically impossible from a storage and production standpoint. That is impossible to do with paper. Terabytes of data, where would we even house it? But with digital technology, we can handle those terabytes of data. The production capacity of information has dropped substantially, so we can handle new types of information. So again, my observation, we don't know what the future holds, but we do know it will be exponentially different. That's the end of my observations. Now, let me provide you with some of my concerns. Okay, first concern. There are gaps in how this is developing, in how this technological change is rolling out from a systems standpoint. And let me just show a few of those gaps, because I think it's, we being researchers, we'd love to see some data. So here's internet usage by age from 2000 to 2009. This is the latest Pew Internet and Society, and if somebody wants that, I can provide that link after we're done. And you can sort of see the lines here. The top lines are the youngest kids, and then down to the oldest adults at the bottom line. And so that's internet usage, but that might not even look that bad. Okay, I mean, there's certainly gaps here, but maybe those gaps are not that problematic. But when you break it down past just internet usage and you start looking at other components, so this is MP3 player ownership by age group. All right, so teens and young adults largely have MP3 players, and as adults get older, they don't do MP3 players. These are your iPods and your Zooms and other music players. All right, so what about social networking? So teens and young adults love social networking. Adults, the majority of adults, don't do social networking. What about Twitter? So you can see the percentage drops of folks that use Twitter, even though Twitter is one of the tools that the adults are close to the kids on. Game console ownership. Similar kinds of pattern. You can see how the gaps are developing. And 97% of teens, this is from this latest study, 12 to 17 play computer, web, portable, or console games. 50% played them yesterday. So kids are constantly playing games. And 97%, almost all of them. What about how you access the internet? So how we're accessing the internet is also not the same. There's gaps in how we're accessing the internet. So by laptops or handhelds, or were you going online wirelessly? So you can see there's substantial gaps in how we're accessing the internet. And what I also don't want us to lose sight of is there are also gaps developing in the demographics of this. And so this is not playing out evenly across age groups, but it's also not playing out evenly across components of society. So it's sort of hard to read, so let me zoom in on this one. So this is wireless use by household income. And so you can see as household income goes up, substantially wireless access goes up. So this is another gap that's also developing as we move forward on technology. So my fundamental concern here is not that the gaps exist. The gaps will sort of always exist, but these gaps are important to recognize that these age categories mean something. Because those groups, those are the folks that make the rules, and these folks, these are the groups to whom the rules apply. And so differences in those groups are going to be quite problematic from a systems standpoint. And we've seen this with a lot of stuff, and I'll show you in law how this plays out. So that's the end of my first concern. My second concern is this negative legal inertia that exists. So let me provide an example of that concept. So I'll use a case as the example. So this is Klump versus Nazareth. Nazareth Area School District. Neil, you probably know this is sort of becoming a famous little case. It happened in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, which is by Allentown, where the red star is. So let me provide you the facts of this case, or at least the alleged facts. All right. So Klump is a high school student. The school has a carry but no use policy. Klump, the phone falls out of his pants into display. So the teacher confiscates it because the policy says that if a phone is displayed, it's not permitted. The teacher then tells the assistant principal about this phone. The teacher and the principal then search the phone's contacts. So we know our little contacts list. Okay. Oh, we're just getting started. The teacher and the principal then make 9 phone calls to the student's contacts to see if other students in the school have their phones on. Then the teacher and the principal access the student's text messages and voicemail. And finally, the teacher and the principal IM the student's brother. All right, and when they're IMing the student's brother, they're posing as the student who lost the phone. All right, so they're like undercover here, trying to get information from another student. Then, while all this is happening, the phone gets a new text message. All right, from the girlfriend. Here's what the girlfriend requests. She requests an effing tampon, which they took to mean a large marijuana cigarette. And then they initiated drug searches of everyone that was involved in this who had contacts with this phone. Obviously, the student and the parents then file a lawsuit, which is why we have a case. All right, so I don't actually care all that much about the case. What I care about is the critical legal analysis here. And that critical legal analysis is the Fourth Amendment. And for a reminder, this is what the Fourth Amendment says. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describing the place to be searched persons. A couple of things interesting, I think, before we move on. One is the probable cause element and how that applies to schools. The second, though, is just even the wording of the Constitution is becoming a bit problematic. It says secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Well, we just got through learning that most of the new world's new information is not on paper anymore. And so how are we supposed to interpret paper moving forward? All right, so let's consider then this term unreasonable. Unreasonable searches and seizures. And the Constitution then spells out that you must have probable cause. But we in schools don't get that level of protection, actually. We get a level of protection called reasonable suspicion, which is a much lower standard. We can search kids much more frequently. And we've interpreted over time reasonable suspicion to mean justified at its inception and reasonable in scope. Okay, so these words, justified and reasonable. What do these words mean? What do they mean from her perspective? What do these words mean from her perspective? And what is this fella supposed to do about it? Which of these perceptions should we take? The student who has grown up with text messaging, has grown up digital, that understands there is privacy components of these things, or the principal who has grown up in a different era in which phones have emerged into, these texting cell phones. This is just one example, but it applies across the board. Internet and these new iPad came out last week, 2 weeks ago. So I think this is the critical concern of mine going forward, is the law is actually not that complex of a thing. We like to tell ourselves that it is because it helps us sleep at night, but it's not very complex. It's the collection of thousands of practical decisions made about the definition of very simple words like this. And so the definition of these words are really important for schools going forward. And how we interpret them is going to be key to how technology integrates. And of course, this was just one example. We also have many others. Copyright, for instance, is becoming a quite big issue. I mean, how are we supposed to interpret the components of fair use, the purpose and character of the use, the nature of the work, the amount of the work, and the effect on the market. These things have changed in the last 20 years. Companies have come and go. I mean, the Googles of the world, these companies come up overnight, and Google is built around a platform of sharing. They want the information shared, Google does. They do not want copyright protection. It's a different kind of environment because we have ubiquitous information, and digital information is so cheap to produce. What are we going to do with student records? Here's a big problem that's coming up right now with FERPA. And this particular component, Section D of FERPA, talks about biometric records. And this is the definition in the statute of biometric records. One or more measurable biological or behavioral characteristics for automated recognition of an individual. Examples include fingerprints, retina and iris patterns, voice prints, DNA sequencing, facial characteristics, and handwriting. Just a couple. Voice prints, I mean, it used to be something quite intrusive if you recorded somebody's voice and put that out. That was pre-YouTube. Now, 20 hours of content are uploaded to YouTube every single minute. All that content is people's voices. People have a different perception of what we should do with voices. VoiceThread, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this tool. Joan's shaking her head over there. This is a great learning tool, but it records student voices, and so technically under FERPA, that's illegal, even though it's an amazing learning tool. And so this is going to be quite problematic, all of these statutes that are left over from a time before we became quite comfortable with sharing this information. And of course, like most things, we are just peeking at the top here. Every component of law is going to have to adapt to this kind of information revolution. It's going to take time. We're just now starting to catch the first components of it, but it will be deep. My third concern is there are systemic restraints. And our system is working against some potential leaders. So this is a series of inventions that have been quite popular and made quite a bit of money. And so I just want to point out that all of these are Indian immigrants, Swedes, Stanford dropouts, Harvard dropouts, the Wikipedia Indiana PhD. I like to mention that one just because I did finish my PhD at Indiana. Who else is in there? Gary's not here. Anyway, so there's a fundamental characteristic. Here's one, Twitter, our latest one, Jack Dorsey from St. Louis, and his characteristic is an NYU dropout. I mean, this is not right. This is not by chance, right? These are all kids and non-Americans, but fundamentally they are outsiders to the system. Because insiders frequently cannot be innovators, and this is quite problematic because there are systemic restraints on innovation. So what are some of those restraints? Well, this is one. This is one. Your school board might be one, and this might be a restraint on innovation. Okay, so we set these things up on purpose. Bureaucracies are built to be restrictive. That's why we have them. All right? Law, then, is a restrictive enterprise. Schooling is a restrictive enterprise. And democracy itself is restrictive. That's sort of the point. And so we know, though, that democracies can change. So how do you change a democracy? Well, there may be no one that I would want to ask more about how do you change a democracy than this guy. And so this is what he says about it. No social advance rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of dedicated individuals. So democratic innovation is possible, but it's dependent on leaders. And in our schools, who is our leader? Typically this person. This person wields a lot of control. They control the budget and the personnel, the assignments, the facilities, the time, the discipline, the curriculum, the evaluations, school policy. And altogether, what they really can control is change. And so if the leaders don't get it, it's not going to happen. But those leaders are restricted. So the situation we find ourselves in are that the people in charge of leading organizations into the 21st century are the ones that are least knowledgeable about it. My last concern. So my summary is this. We're going to have to rethink leadership. and property and expression and privacy and due process and policy across the board, which means we're going to have to rethink schooling and we're going to need to rethink learning fundamentally. And the question that I'll leave you with for discussion when we come back after Jerry's is, who will do this?